This is the Actual Fluency Podcast, helping you become a better language learner by providing motivating weekly inspiration, as well as top tips and tricks from expert guests. And now, your host, Chris Broholm.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 111 of the Actual Fluency Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Austrian polyglot Michael Mischkot, who really takes an engineering perspective on language learning and shares a lot of aha moments that he has found himself over the last few years. And he recently released a book called Smile, Talk, Cheesecake, where he describes his findings of improving language learning, making it more efficient, his own personal techniques. And he also includes a selection of interviews with very successful language learners, many of whom have been on the podcast. So definitely check out that book, Smile, Talk, Cheesecake, on Amazon. And I know he's working on an ebook version also, so you'll be able to pick it up for your Kindle device very soon. But for now, it's only available in paperback. Or if you're listening to this in the future, maybe it's available for Kindle. But check it out on Amazon anyway. And before we get into the interview, I just wanted to mention two quick improvements that has happened on the podcast recently. As you might be able to tell, I have a bit of a cold, or I'm recovering from a cold that has been persisting quite a while now. So if my voice is a little bit nasal, that's why. But in the meantime, I've been working on a bit of behind the scenes improvements on the podcast. So if you go to actualfluency.com/podcast, you'll be able to see that all the episodes now are labeled sequentially. So no more seasons. They're just from 1 until 111, which is this newest one that you're listening to right now. And I did this because I was really getting annoyed with the seasons. I originally thought it was going to make things easier to point to certain episodes and to distinguish these breaks that I would take from recording. But you can make great plans, but if you don't follow through with them, the kind of whole system falls apart. So what I realized was that instead of taking these very scheduled breaks, let's say a month every 6 months, I would always have these random breaks due to excessive traveling or illness, like this week, or technical problems or appointments being cancelled, or there would always be something that meant that the podcast didn't go out every week, which was of course still my goal. So I don't really need these planned breaks. And yeah, maybe I'm more of a chaos pilot, as they say in Danish, somebody who thrives a bit under chaos. And if I can put a podcast episode out as regularly as possible, maybe it doesn't matter that it's not in a perfectly organized environment. So the result of this is that each episode is now labeled from 1 till 111. There's no episode 13 though, because some cultures see 13 as extremely unlucky, and I didn't want to step on anyone's toes. Maybe it was overly politically correct, but whatever. And there's also an episode 101 and a half, because I started numbering from both sides, and when I came to the middle, which was 101, I realized that I had made a miscount somewhere, possibly due to the lack of an episode 13, or maybe I was just an idiot. But either way, there's now an episode 101 and a half. So yeah, you know how it is. And the other advantage of this is that you can now go to every episode with a short URL. So you can go to actualfluency.com/the episode number. So from 1 till 9, it's 01 till 09. And then from 10 and above, it's just the number itself. So actualfluency.com/55 will get you to episode 55. And this is useful for when, you're listening to the episode and you just want to quickly get to it. Or somebody says, hey, I was on episode 72 of the Actual Fluency Podcast. You can just type in /72. Of course, the audios of the podcast have not been updated. So when I start the introduction of these episodes, then they'll still say season 2 episode 5 or whatever. I do have a very ambitious and long plan of going back and editing all the episodes properly, fixing any audio problems, leveling the audio, maybe getting rid of some out-of-date information, maybe adding some sponsors or something, if I can find anyone who's willing to to help out the podcast. But that is going to take a long time to go through. There's 111 episodes, as you know, and editing each one could take an hour or two. So that's definitely a huge project, but it's on my mind, and I definitely will get to it at some point. But in the meantime, just enjoy that now each episode is very nicely numbered, and you can find them by using the /episode number link. And so, of course, if you want to see the timestamps for this episode or any show notes or links that we mention, you can go to actualfluency.com /111 or 111 to find all that information. Michael was really nice and helped me add the timestamps for these, which is something that I don't usually have time for when putting these episodes together. So if you want to see what the questions are or the topics that we talk about before you start listening, or if you don't have that much time and you just want to pick out the areas that you find interesting, then go to actualfluency.com /111. That's all for me for this time. So I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll see you in the next one. How do you get into language learning? How did you develop that interest, and how did you get to where you are today?
Hi Chris. Thank you very much for having me in your podcast. Hi everyone listening. And my name is Michael. I got into language learning, I think, pretty much like every other person on this planet. So I grew up learning my mother tongue, German, and then I started going to school. And I wasn't particularly interested in language learning in the first place, but when I was about 15, so at the age of 10 in Austria, you add English in primary school, and then at 15 we were supposed to choose another language, which was French in my case, and that didn't go very well in the beginning. So my parents used a little trick. After half a year, I was performing maybe average, but they said if I was able to get the best grade in French until the end of the year, then I could choose a destination, like for traveling to a place where French was spoken. And I actually succeeded in getting the best grade, and so I chose Brussels because I'd already been to Paris, and that was maybe my first motivational trigger. Maybe, of course, also consciously, but maybe at an unconscious level, something that started my interest. And when I went to Brussels and I was able to apply those skills, it made me quite happy and proud and curious about it. So then a year later, we could choose another language at school. So I chose Spanish. And for my story, maybe one critical point was that at 18, so during school leaving exams, I was not very, confident about what specifically doing the school leaving exam in English in Austria meant for the professional level of my English. So I heard about those language certificates for the first time. And I thought, okay, if I do the certificate at the same time, like the school leaving exam, it's like a test for each other. So if I pass the certificate, then I'm for sure going to pass the school leaving exam and vice versa. So I signed up for a language certificate for the CAE in Cambridge, C1 in English, and for the French B1, the DELF BBA, probably something like that, which were taking place pretty much at the same time, like the school leaving exams. And since then, I've developed a passion. It's maybe a bit engineering-like very organized and measurable, of almost participating every year in such a certificate, in such an exam.
Ah.
And then the next language was actually Russian during the military service in Austria. So in Austria, the military service is still obligatory. You can choose like some civil service instead, but I had the opportunity of playing the piano in the army, in the military orchestras. That was quite a lot of fun. And for keeping the brain fit, I chose, I think, another language. And then I started studying Chinese, and that was also quite an important point in my language learning journey, because that was the first language where I really failed. Because so far it wasn't the fastest process, but I wasn't aware of any fast methods yet, and there was not so much available either, because all those things we are comfortable with now, like YouTube and Facebook and all the blogs and podcasts and everything. That was like 10 years ago, so that there was not so much online resources available, and most people were just studying with regular books. And so it felt like normal. I didn't question the speed and also not the effectiveness. But for Chinese, the system, the course-based system just didn't work for me. And so I went to 2-3 different classes, and I failed in all of them. And what happened then was that I moved to Denmark for the first time in my life, like in 2012. And I did an internship at DTU, at the Technical University of Denmark. And my boss back then, she was Chinese. So then during lunch or during break, it was quite a fun. I got my first Assimil book, my first Assimil course. And then when I was in the lab waiting for some experiment, you do some experiment and you have like 2 minutes of waiting until the machine is ready or something.
Yeah.
and in those within those breaks, I would study a page of Assimil, and then after the lab test, I would go to my boss and talk to her 2-3 sentences in Chinese, or very simple Chinese, but still it was like fun and very, very nice experience. And then I went back to Austria for about half a year. But when I came back to Denmark half a year later, and then I decided taking the PhD offer that they gave me. And when I was in Denmark for the internship, I was quite clear about that I wasn't interested in learning Danish, because I was still not aware of the fast learning techniques, and I thought I would only stay there for 4 months. So I thought, okay, it wasn't really worth the effort. And I had the opportunity of improving my Chinese. Whereas when the moment I signed the PhD contract, it became 100% clear to me that I wanted to learn Danish, because it was like my place to be for the 3 to 4 years to come. And what happened then was a combination of several experiences. So I remember one thing, of course, in Denmark, they have the very professional system of supporting immigrants and expats in learning Danish with the classes. So the classes are for free, and it's a course system that takes about 3-4 years. And in my office, it's a university, and so it's very international. So 80-90% people from abroad. So everybody was going to those classes, and I remember that I realized that people were like kind of depressed on Tuesdays. So after 2-3 weeks, I asked hey guys, what's up? What happens on Tuesday? That Tuesday morning, everybody was sitting in the office like And then one guy replied like, "Oh, Michael, that's really simple. It's just Danish class Tuesday afternoons."
Oh no!
And that was the day when I decided I would never attend those classes. So then I started doing research about what other options are there for learning languages, and I found Benny Lewis' book Fluent in 3 Months, and that was really an eye opener, because his story of learning German basically up to a C2 level. So I think he missed some points in the listening part for actually passing the exam, but for my interpretation, he basically got to a C2 level in German within 3 months, and that's really impressive for somebody with an Irish background. And so I thought, if Benny Lewis can learn German with an Irish background within 3 months, then I, with a German background, can learn Danish within, let's say, 6 months. And that was the moment when I signed up for the studio program, which is the highest certificate you can get in Danish language examination. So it's the C1 level. And I passed this exam, which took place 6 to 8 months after I started studying Danish. And that was my first experience with really fast language learning techniques. I applied similar methods to, it was my first experience with italki, for example. So my italki teacher back then, his name was Jörn, and he lives in the Philippines. So he's like 65 or something, and he retired and he went to the Philippines. And so every morning or every other morning, 2-3 times a week, I would sit down with him on Skype, and he was sitting under the palm tree in the Philippines, and I was sitting in my pajama in Denmark, in Kongens. And so that's basically how I learned Danish, which was even funnier because I was living in Denmark, but at that moment I didn't have so much contact to the Danes, because I was basically living in Lyngby, going with my bike 10 minutes to the university, spending the day in this international environment, and going back home.
Right.
So it was quite fun living in Denmark, learning Danish with a guy from the Philippines.
That's fantastic. I love that you decide to learn Danish, even though you didn't really have that much contact. But you just said, well, I'm going to be here for a couple of years now, so might as well,
Well, I think it's definitely a key element in integrating yourself into a different society. And the Danes are really very friendly people. Also Copenhagen, as you said, or in Denmark in general, the level of English people are speaking is really, really high through all age groups, wherever you go. But still, when I compare the experience of when I was an intern for those 4 months, and then the experience I had after I started studying Danish, it's still, people are still even more friendly when you are able to communicate in their mother tongue. So that's just something worth investing in. I think it shows respect to the other people. It shows that you care about the person you're talking to, and that's a good feeling. It's a good experience for both sides, I believe.
Yeah, and also I just think you get different relationships or reactions, where if you just speak English, well, you might communicate, you might be colleagues or whatever, but if you start to speak like the native language, then I think you can get better connections. I would certainly feel closer connected to someone if they spoke to me in Danish in Denmark rather than English or whatever, even though I consider English almost a native language as well. But there is just a difference when you hear your native language that can't really be described.
Yes, it's maybe not so easy to quantify or to rationalize, but if you meet somebody and he or she answers to you just a couple of sentences in your mother tongue, it's always like, okay, cool, yeah, it's something to relate to, and this person takes the effort, and
Yeah, exactly. So what was it about the Chinese was it the language itself that gave you trouble, or was it just because it was so different, or what was it? Because it sounds like you had great results with, the most similar languages like French and Spanish, but then you kind of hit a bit of a block with Chinese before you discovered all these more power learning methods. What do you remember what it was like learning Chinese at that point?
Yes. So I think it's a combination of all the things that are really different in Chinese compared to, let's say, European languages. You have the character-based system, so I had no clue. My brain didn't know how to process that information and where to start, because basically back then it was like random strikes added in some way, and it didn't make any sense. And the second element is the pronunciation, because for European languages, basically it's you can like sing them now. Of course, you can sing in Chinese too, but it's like the melody, in my opinion, in my perception, is maybe more flexible than in Mandarin, for example, and really caring about the tones at least in the beginning, because at some point, of course, it becomes a natural way of speaking in Chinese as well. Those tones were quite challenging. My muscles were not used to the different ways. So for example, on YouTube, there is an MRI video which compares a native speaker of German and a native speaker of Chinese. And it really shows the differences where you see like the muscles, which part of the mouth the tongue is touching and so on. It's really fascinating. And those new movements, those new muscle activities, the body has to learn. It takes time, and I wasn't used to such a learning experience back then.
Right. And I don't know, did you say why you wanted to learn Chinese, or did you just kind of, was it just a spur of the moment choice?
Well, it maybe sounds arrogant, but I was like, okay, so what's the major languages in the world? And then I was like, okay, English, Czech, French, Czech, German, Czech, and Spanish, what is left? And of course, there's always more left to do than we ever can achieve. But Mandarin was quite at the top. So yeah, it's like together with English, one of the two most important languages in the world, at least.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I just wanted to accept the challenge. Because again, I had tried or I'd studied many other languages before, and so Chinese, Mandarin seemed like the next logical step. And it was really so. I remember there were really many girls in class, so we were like 10, 15 people, but I was the only guy, or maybe another guy, or one or two other guys, but most of them were girls. And they were also so excited. So some of them brought their what's the name of those cards where you have the character on one side and the description, flashcards and all those things. And it was amazing to me to see how successful they were with this technique. But I had never been successful with studying vocabulary from a book or like they gave us in school, okay, take this list, learn it till next Wednesday. We got that homework. I never did it. I never ever did such a homework, or if I tried, then it wasn't successful for me. So,
right. So what did you do instead for vocabulary, and maybe talk about if that changed when you discovered Benny Lewis and all this power learning? Like, did you have a different method for learning vocabulary before and after that, or has it been pretty consistent?
Well, I think it really depends on the language, and then it really depends on the languages that you studied before. So, how to start on that one? I mean, at school, I don't even know how that happened. It was just the exposure to the content over a period of years, and then applying it every now and then. So, for example, one thing I remember would be like for French, I would write a text, like let's say the task for the next exam was writing a letter to a friend to a pal in France. And then I would write such a text, or the homework was already such a text at some point anyway. And then I would send the text to my father because he works in France every now and then. He's very proficient in French. And he would send me back the corrected text. And then I would just memorize the text and write it down during the exam word by word and modifying parts of it for making it fit to the actual task. Such things.
Interesting.
Then, yeah, it's like, I think passing those exams is also being clever about what they ask you to do. And I remember one sentence which was like, "Je ne sais pas ce que je dois faire maintenant," which means I don't know what I shall do now. French has those many little short words. So, "Je ne sais pas ce que je dois faire maintenant" is kind of like 10 words already. And if the task was write a text of 200 words and you write that sentence and you know how to write that sentence, you already have 5% completely correct.
Right.
With no effort. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. But I think you could also kind of, like, that's good for the test, of course. But I also think you can take it one step further and say, when you learn the languages, there are going to be these fixed expressions or fixed sentences that you're going to be saying all the time anyway. So it makes sense for you to learn that. And I think also that's a big part of what Benny is doing with the new books. He's providing you with inspiration for the initial sentences that you're going to be saying all the time. Like if you meet someone new, you're always going to be talking about yourself at some point. You're like, where are you from? What are you doing now? And you're going to be asking the same questions. So even though you were using it for an exam, I think it's very applicable to sort of real life, because, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you didn't know what to do, but if you were, then you knew how to say it in French too.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that was really a breakthrough in my learning strategy, because in the past I was like, okay, I learn words. And then if I know words, then I can combine them to sentences. Now, but that doesn't work when talking about correct sentence construction in a different language. Sometimes the sentences or the message is created with different words. If you say "Jeg har det godt," I'm fine. Those two sentences are communicating the same message in Danish and in English, but the words that are used are completely different. And I was really struggling with accepting that, because then again in the exam, if you start creating sentences on your own during the exam without properly knowing how to do it, is like a high risk of making a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
So once I accepted that, then everything got much easier.
And you run into it and just for the record, this is exactly what I did, and I still am a little bit guilty of it, to be honest. But it's something that I keep trying to get away from. But it's just so easy to do learn words instead of sentences, because for sentences you kind of have to like either find a good flashcard deck, or you have to find a good resource that has lots of sentences, like maybe the Pod 101 series or Glossicare or something. But what I would say is for the more difficult grammar languages, like Russian, for instance, the words are very rarely in nominative. So it doesn't make much sense for me to learn a certain word in nominative if it's always going to come after a genitive, marker.
Yes, so true.
It's like, it's great that you know how to say this word in nominative, but nobody has ever said it in nominative. So, it's never the object. I mean, it's never the subject of the sentence. It's never. So why would you do that? But unfortunately, not only is this kind of the standard for when people start to learn about independent language learning like we're doing, but also in schools, of course, it's a big problem, because you get a list of adjectives and you get a list of subjects or nouns or whatever, and a list of verbs, and then they're like, oh yeah, combine them. And it's like, well, that works for English because words don't change depending on where they're in the sentence, but already in German you're going to have problems, right? Like, the famous example is who's biting who, so for me, it definitely moving towards sentences also is a big difference, because you also hear yourself, like when I was talking to my Russian tutor, you hear yourself saying the same sentences all the time. Like, I like this, I like that, or I didn't like that, or this was great, or I've been doing this for a long time, or I started doing this since, or whatever, and at some point it's just funny, because you're like, I said the sentence like a million times, but I didn't create it. I learned the whole sentence and then I started using it. So I definitely agree with you on that.
Yeah, and I think the school learning system, or also the normal course system, it's a bit disappointing in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. So no matter how brilliant the teacher is, no matter how motivated the teacher is, how much he or she cares about you. I've met great teachers in all the classes that I attended. However, no matter what system this teacher uses, if you have 10, 20 people in a classroom, no matter what system you use, it's the wrong system for 90% of the students. Yeah. Because each of us has a different background, a different level of motivation, a different level of, let's say, emotional fitness, of energy level at that point in time, different interests, different learning speeds, kinesthetic, learning type, audio, visual, whatever. Sure. And I think that we need a system that supports the differences in our learning styles.
Yeah, I think the language learning in school should be much more about supporting, not teaching. It should be about students figuring out how they learn, and then they should be doing the learning themselves. And then the classes should be about enforcing, supporting, and sort of maybe practice as well. So if you had some kind of sentences or a role play or something, you can practice actually speaking, because often what I see happen in classes is that, yeah, people can translate a text, they can even write maybe, or they can, they can understand almost everything that's written. But if you ask them to have a simple conversation about what happened yesterday or what they had for breakfast, they're like, they choke up. And that, to me, that's just the ultimate failure. Like, if you can translate a text from German into English perfectly, but you can't tell someone what you had for breakfast this morning, for me, that's total language failure. And I know that some people, if you work with it, of course, or if you're only interested in the text or translating, then yeah, I'm not talking about those situations, but in school, that's what happens, right?
Yes, and it's such an expensive system. It costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of time. It's hundreds of hours, people sitting in classroom. And I'm meeting my friends, my colleagues from school 10, 15 years ago. And they are great people, very intelligent people, lawyers, doctors, all kind of stuff. But ask them, can you still have like a 1 minute conversation in French? I was, no, mate, that was 10 years ago. I have no idea. Yeah, bonjour, maybe that's all. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just terrible. But hopefully by, doing stuff like this and also going to the events, we can spread the awareness that people should be more. Perhaps it's also about taking responsibility for your own learning and just doing what you feel like, and getting the support from someone like Benny, who has kind of laid out a strategy that everyone can use, and maybe ditching those old rote techniques and whatnot.
Yeah, I think the polyglot community is really the thing that helped me with the breakthroughs that I had during the last couple of years. Because, yeah, like we said, Benny with his first book was definitely the biggest role model, and still probably is. And I remember going to my first polyglot conference in Novi Sad, and I was really nervous because I had like my name tag, and with the stickers, with the flags and what languages. And I didn't know what to expect. Are they all geniuses or nerds, or do they have an IQ of 500, or what is going to happen? And then on the first day, some 16, 17-year-old Croatian kid came up to me, and I had my China and Russia sticker on my name tag as well. So this guy walked up to me and he started speaking fluent Mandarin, and I was like, holy shit! I didn't understand a single word, and I was repeating the 3 Chinese sentences that I knew, like, sure, Michael, I'm Michael, and ni chao shen me minzi, and all that stuff. But that was about it. Like a basic A1, A2 level is like, you can say some stuff, but then the challenge is understanding what comes back.
Yes.
And then after 20 seconds or so, he realized I wasn't understanding much. So then he was switching. Okay, what else can we do? Russian. And then he was continuing with completely fluent Russian. And I just had passed my Russian B1 in 2008, I think, and Novi Sad was 2014 maybe. So in those 6 years, I hadn't practiced much Russian. And so he realized I wasn't very good in that one either. And then he got very disappointed, spoke to me in Spanish for a couple of minutes. That went fine. And then he just left. So I wasn't the best experience to him. But it was definitely a great learning experience to me. So what I did right afterwards was I took my name tag and I wrote A1 till C2 to all the languages. Right. Nobody could say anything. But those are the moments where you really learn. That was definitely very much out of my comfort zone. And during my first conference, I was not comfortable at all with switching between those languages. That seemed something like, how is that possible? And that's something that once you go to a conference 1, 2, 3 times, it's so great. Now I had the Skype call with Robin McPherson. We spoke 7 languages in half an hour. Wow. I couldn't even have imagined doing something like that, or being possible to do something like that 5 or 10 years ago.
Right.
And that's really where this community, we support each other, we help each other to grow. It's so many awesome people in this community, so many great videos on YouTube and so on. And I really love that positive energy that comes from all the activities.
Yeah, and I think that the events are just kind of the pinnacle of that, or like it's the highlight for me, certainly, to go to those events. And
yes,
and because in a weird way it makes it real, because if you, let's say you want to learn Chinese, and your reason is, well, it's spoken by many people. When you're sitting at home, it's like, well, what? Sometimes you question yourself, like, why am I doing this? Like, this seems so pointless. But then you go to the event, and this may sound stupid, but some French guy speaks to you in perfect Mandarin, and you're like, this is why I need to go home and, become better at it. And it's not I guess, it's not the best reason to have, but for me, it just makes perfect sense, because there's something about speaking with other learners as well. Like, it's not as intimidating to speak. Like, I spoke some Russian with a guy originally from Greece, and at the event in Thessaloniki, and I was just a lot more relaxed, because I knew this guy wasn't perfectly fluent either. I mean, my Russian is pretty bad, but when I speak to native speakers, it's hard for them to talk to me, because they don't know how to change their language, and they know they can't speak at full speed and use every word. So it usually is either way too simple, so it's like how are you, what are you doing, the same, or it's too hard, so you just don't understand anything. But when you're speaking with other learners, I feel like this kind of like, we're in this together, we'll try it, we'll work it out. Yes. You can say whatever you want and I'll help you, and like, there's no judging or anything, which is also super important. Like, you don't want to feel like you're being put on the spot and like tested if you actually can speak the languages.
Yes, I definitely agree. So that's maybe one of the emotional challenges in language learning, especially in the beginning, because you have to take care of your own state, of your own emotional state, for being able to produce whatever you want to communicate in that language. And then you also have to take care of the native, like you said. How is he or she going to react? Will she take you for full? Then you have like the reply in super fast, super local language, maybe with some dialect even, or in like very simple sentences, which might be too easy for you or something. So it's also like how to present yourself and your what you're trying to do in that moment is really important, in my opinion, because for example, many language learning books. I'm just studying Slovak now for the gathering, and one of the first sentences that are in the book are like, "Oh, I don't speak Slovak. My pronunciation is really bad," or something in that direction. But that doesn't help anybody.
No.
Like, I would prefer having a sentence in my repertoire of like, "Hi, I'm Michael. I'm studying Slovak. I started, 2 weeks ago, and Please speak a little bit more slowly, or a little bit faster, or whatever. Or please, could you support me in my Slovak learning endeavor, or whatever? Because 99.9%, or let's say the people that I'm meeting, they all very nice and friendly. So the native is trying to support you, and the native maybe doesn't know you. So if I'm speaking to a Danish person and maybe my Danish wasn't that good in the beginning, they would just reply in English for being nice to me, for supporting me. That's their intention. So it's a positive intention. So then it's my responsibility as a language learner how to turn that into something that I can benefit to.
Yeah, for sure.
That is maybe something many language learners are not so aware of, or which is not that. It's like the one of the biggest questions in also during the gatherings and conferences. What to do if the person replies in English is like that. How many languages do you speak, and what to do if the person replies in English? That's like the two ways.
That's true, and it happens a lot in Denmark for sure. But it's not, like you say, it's not because they think you're bad at Danish. They just want to help you and ease the the conversation along, and they think that,
Yes.
oh, he probably knows English better, so I'll just let him know that I actually speak English. And so, I mean, you can pretend that you don't understand English, then sometimes that works. I'd say
That's a bit sneaky.
I'd say also, there are some people who go, let's say, to a restaurant or a cafe or something, and they insist speaking a very low level of the native language with the server. And I always say, the server is trying to do a job, and if that person has time to, listen to your lower level of that language and has the patience and doesn't look super annoyed, then yeah, go for it. But also, don't be afraid to just speak English, get it over with, and let that poor person do their job. If they have 20 tables to serve, they don't have time to be your personal tutor necessarily. So there's a balance there sometimes.
Yeah, I think a native is a person to model. A random native is not your tutor or your teacher.
Right.
So it's like I can watch that person, I can copy, I can imitate their behavior, their way of saying things, their pronunciation. But again, we have such great opportunities with tandem partners, with italki tutors, and that's our homework, and then we can apply whatever is already applicable in the real world.
Yeah, exactly. So how did you find out about the Polyglot conference? Because the Novi Sad one, I guess, was the second one?
Second one, yes, I guess so.
And kind of a small group of people at that time. So how did you hear about it?
Well, the key factor was Benny Lewis' book. Mm-hmm. And then he wrote about those, like Richard Simcott and all the other famous polyglots that already existed, quote unquote, back then. And then I started doing some research on YouTube, and then it was like, oh my God, those guys are so awesome. And yeah, like you said before, meeting those people in real life and really experiencing them speaking all those languages, it was a great experience, and it inspired me becoming a true polyglot myself.
Yeah, there are some really talented people like yourself out there who can just switch perfectly and use all those languages. And that's probably the main reason to go to the gathering. I mean, except of course to hang out with friends and meet new people. It's just to get that motivational boost as well, because you see what's possible basically, and you realize, well, yeah, this guy might be better at learning languages than me, but I mean, we're both human. We both have the same body parts. We both have the same basic premises for learning languages. So
exactly,
this shouldn't be why. What's stopping me? And actually, you said that earlier in the recording. You said something like, when you figured out what was possible or something like that, and you had a huge kind of like your attitude kind of changed, and I think that's really incredible as well, because I think a lot of people grow up and they maybe do badly in their second language in school, like you started with French, was it? And
yes.
A lot of people who go to French class when they're about 15 or something, they do very poorly. Like they can't even say their own name or whatever. And so they get this idea that, oh, well, I failed this one, so I couldn't possibly learn a language. But when you get you don't only learn that it's possible, you also see others doing it. It just changes the whole game, because now it's not about can I, it's like how do I, It's not about whether it's possible or not. It's just how do I actually do it, and I think that's a big difference, because you might read something on the internet like, oh, I learned 10 languages or something, or you might even listen to some of these podcasts and think, oh wow, Michael learned 7-8 languages. He's genius. I want to do that too, but there's probably still this doubt in your mind until you actually go out and see someone do it, or meeting somebody in person at these events. I don't know if you feel the same, but I think a lot changes when it becomes reality all of a sudden, and not just on some blog or YouTube video or a podcast even.
Well, I agree 100%. So I think it's like, first there comes this phase of maybe astonishment, of fascination. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh my God, there are people out there who can do that. then the second phase is maybe, well, I would like to do that too, but I think I can. And then after some time, it's like, but let's take a look. How did they actually do it? What specifically did they do? What did they do? How much time did they spend? What were their own sticking points? What are they doing differently to me compared to me, for example? And then you can apply step by step those elements. And most of the time, at least to my experience, you can replicate or achieve similar results. Let's say at least the first 80% or so. Of course, everybody has different talents and strengths and genetic preconditions or whatever. But the first 80% is usually achievable for almost anybody, and that's the great thing because. Yeah, if somebody speaks 20 languages, but 80% of that one is still 16, so
right,
16 is very, very great too. So
yeah, and also what I also keep saying is that language learning really is not about, one day you don't speak Russian, then the next day you speak Russian, suddenly your world changes. It's like when you can say one thing, your world is changed, really, because if you meet someone and you say your one sentence, let's say it's a kind of an obscure language or for instance, in Danish, right? If you go to Danish people and they know you're a foreigner or you're in a foreign environment, or maybe you're even abroad, so you're somewhere else and you meet Danish people and you start speaking to them in Danish or say something quite Danish to them, like that one thing will make a big difference because they just get so surprised, so the enjoyment of the language learning is at every step of the way. When you begin to say hi, when you can order your food in the restaurant, when you can go to the supermarket and ask for a bag, these small things, they bring you so much enjoyment along the way. So for me, that's the other great thing. It's not about, when I started learning Spanish, I couldn't speak Spanish and now I speak Spanish, so now my life has changed. No, it's all about the journey getting there also. So yeah.
That is so true. So I remember when like a couple of years ago in Vienna, we have this very nice tradition of the ball season. So in January, February there are many huge dancing events with people dressing up, girls in white dresses and guys in suits and so on. And I love going to such events. So there I met some international students. And one of them was Russian, and I just said one or two sentences in Russian. I don't know, очень приятно вас знакомиться, or something like that, very simple. And she was like, oh my God, I'm in Austria and somebody speaks Russian. And that opened the whole evening with that very nice girl. And we had a wonderful evening. And all because that door opener was, for starting a conversation, starting to get to know each other, was one Russian sentence that I could say. And from that point on, you can connect and develop a connection or a personal relationship to wherever the destination of the journey might be, but it opens so many opportunities. And the wonderful thing about language learning, I think, is also that I've never had a bad experience because of some language that I spoke. So it's always like an extra that you have, an extra competence, an extra option of communicating. Like you said before, if somebody is stressed in Stroll in a coffee house, well, no need for forcing it, ordering the coffee in Danish or in whatever language, but it gives the option.
Yeah.
And sometimes it really makes life easier. So, for example, also within the PhD project, of course, my engineering PhD is the working language is English and the papers and so on. But then sometimes I'm working with industrial partners, and then I'm going to Jylland or whatever, and then I'm talking to a local technician who is taking care of the machine, for example. And with this person, it's actually more convenient for both of us tackling that topic that, I don't know, the machine broke or we need to fix something or whatever, talking about that in Danish. And that gives more flexibility, that gives more options to the people communicating, and that's really great, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Before we finish here, Can you share a little bit of how you're attacking, so to speak, a Slovak in terms of like what methods are you using, and what kind of books or software apps or websites or something are you kind of using to do that, and how did you how is that different from languages you learned before that?
Well, because you mentioned apps, I'm not such a big fan of apps, honestly. I think everybody who likes it should use it. I think they are an interesting concept. Honestly, I haven't found an app that kept my interest for longer than a week. Maybe it goes also in the direction like we said before, learning sentences. Now, of course, there are also already apps for learning sentences, but I think artificial intelligence is definitely a very it's an upcoming option, but I think we are not quite there yet. So with Slovak, I started 2 weeks ago, and in the beginning is really taking the time of getting yourself organized. So now 2 weeks have passed, and I'm happy having my first 2-3 books. I got a dictionary. I started having the first conversations. So I wrote to the polyglot organizers. Tomorrow I'm going to Bratislava. Actually, I posted on Tinder, like the status, who wants to meet me for practicing Slovak. So I'm planning doing a video, like a video diary over the whole 10 weeks until the gathering, to see how I actually do it. Because I think that's maybe still a bit of a myth. So now we have that many polyglots, and it's already been well documented that polyglots are able to speak 5, 10, 20 languages. But maybe it's still a bit of a myth how specifically they are doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
So what I'm trying to do here is basically sitting down in front of the webcam every other day or so, talking 5 minutes. Okay, so today was a super busy day. I found 5 minutes there when I was in the tram to the city center. I listened to TA3, I think it's a Slovak TV channel. I'm not understanding much what they are talking about yet, but it's a way of getting used to the sound. So then in italki, for example, I'm still in the phase, or I'm always doing that, no matter how high my level is. But especially in the beginning, I'm mainly reading to the tutor for training those new muscles. No matter whether I understand the text or not, maybe in my opinion it's even better not understanding what the text means for the practicing of the pronunciation. And yeah, so starting with simple texts now, maybe applying my skills for the first time tomorrow. I'm really looking forward, because some pronunciation, they are having some sneaky words there, and it's already getting better. But I'm really excited about. It's one thing whether you believe yourself that you're pronouncing a word correctly, and then going to a random native on the street and saying that word, then you really see whether you pronounce it correctly or not.
Yeah. You need to know the correct pronunciation to know if you're doing it right, and sometimes you can't even hear it. I remember with my Russian tutor, like, she would say 2 sounds, and I just said, to be honest, that sounds completely the same to me. And it just takes time for your ear to actually understand the fine details of some of the words, especially if the language is very different from your original language.
Yeah, I had such an experience in St. Petersburg, my first time in Russia, and they had those little donuts. I think the name is pishki or something. And there was a long queue because they were really good. And everybody just said the number, so like 10, 12, 15, and so on. And when it was my turn, I say like 15, пожалуйста. And she looked at me like, what the hell do you want? I was like, 15. And he was like, what? Like, fiat. I was sweating already because there were like 20 people behind me being annoyed of me taking so long for saying what I wanted.
Yeah.
And, 15. And she was like, 15. And then tuck, and I had my 15 pishki, and then, yeah. But it's like one word, and like you say, pronunciation, sometimes it has to be precise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I find that especially with Russian, like one wrong pronunciation can break the whole meaning. I don't know if it's because Russians are not used to foreigners learning it, or I don't know, but I just had lots of problems if I didn't pronounce very precisely, then the tutor just wouldn't understand me, and she had lots of experience with foreigners, so it can be tough.
But I think it's really, like you said before, it's like your own ear has to get accustomed to distinguishing those new options that you have.
Yeah.
And it's part of the learning experience, so it's nothing bad about it. It's like learning some new fitness exercise or so. It's okay. It's part of it.
Yeah, of course. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. And I think that, as long as you just keep learning and you... Because some people are also a bit obsessed about, how fast can I learn the language? But I think for most people who don't have 8 hours a day to learn whatever language they want to learn, it's a process and it takes time. And even though you can learn languages much faster today than probably ever before in history, then it doesn't mean that it's just automatic and overnight. So that's one disclaimer. You have to put in the work regularly. And if you can only put in 10 minutes a day, well, then, just going to take you some time. But you will eventually get to wherever you want to get to.
Exactly. And that's also one idea of this video documentary that I'm doing now is I'm really busy, like with the PhD and the traveling and all kind of things. So I want to demonstrate that it's possible integrating such a fast language learning experience into an average life, into a busy person's life.
I think that's a great idea, and actually that's something that I've been missing a little bit over the last few years, because there's been lots of before and after videos, maybe they'll show their first day speaking terrible Spanish or something, and then they'll show their day 90 video and they're like, oh, now I speak Spanish. And sometimes you're like, well, what happened in between? It's not often that people actually show each working session or each working day or consistent updates, so you see what's happening. So I think that's a great idea and something that a lot of people would find interesting to see how your skills develop over time and what kind of how you change, maybe if you change your methods along the way or approach. So I think that can be very cool.
Thank you.
It's a great idea, and something that I also thought about doing because also vlogging is so popular now. So it seems obvious for me that there should be more language learning vlogs, like just people showing the process, but also maybe their life, because I think a lot of polyglots also have a lot of interesting lives. Like they might travel much more than the average person, or they they go to different places than the normal person. Like, I don't know if you have the same people on your friend list on Facebook as I do, but I get like status updates for like Georgia and Armenia, and people are all over the place. And if I look at the people who are not in the community, it's always like they're posting pictures from like Mallorca or Malaga or something. There's nothing wrong with those cities, don't get me wrong, but it's funny to see that. It seems that being part of that community also shows an interest in unusual cultures or different cultures than just whatever is the norm for the country, for the European countries.
Yes, very true.
So fantastic, and thank you so much for taking the time to come on. And I know you're busy with the PhD and everything, so I really appreciate you taking the time. And I love your story. I think it's amazing and quite unique also. I haven't quite heard anyone who use the certifications as much as you do. Like, I know some people are very interested in them and they use them, but I haven't heard of people who are saying pretty much at the beginning, signing up so they know that the date is coming. I mean, that must be such a motivational factor, because you're just constantly thinking, well, in 6 months, I need to pass this exam.
Well, I am. Yes. So first, thank you very much for the invitation. About the certificates, it's really a booster. First of all, I think it helps me in reaching a similar level in all 4 competences, like speaking, reading, writing. Sorry, because sometimes the easier ones or whatever, depending on the particular situation. But sometimes it's like, oh, I watched 50 movies in Spanish and then I'm pretty good in understanding Spanish, but maybe not so good in writing or whatever. But with the certificate, you really need a decent level in all 4 competences for passing the exam. And then, like you said before, once you have signed up for something, it's like, at least in my case, like there's the proud of oh, I really want to pass that because I signed up for it. And so far I was lucky, and knock on wood, I passed all of them. And I already signed up for Slovak. Is maybe the most ambitious one I've done so far. But I signed up for B1 the day before the gathering starts, or actually the day the gathering starts.
Wow.
So let's see. I don't know. Now I've publicly announced it. I'm usually not a fan of publicly announcing goals, because then if it doesn't happen, then But let's try it this way this time, and we'll see what happens.
Well, that's a huge challenge, because that's only about, what is it, a month and a half away or
50
something?
days, yeah, something like that. But the thing is also, let's say somebody doesn't pass. Let's say somebody doesn't pass a B1. This person still probably has a decent A2 then.
Yeah.
So no worries.
Yeah, that's true.
Whatever happens.
That's the old saying, right? If you aim for the moon, or if you aim for the stars and hit the moon on the way, that's still okay.
Exactly.
Whatever it is. So having those very ambitious goals can definitely work in your favor. But I think the more important thing is just having that date, or having that really, like, it's not in your control, because I could say, oh, by this time next year I want to speak any language, whatever, Swedish. Okay, that's a terrible example. I want to speak Slovak in a year. I can make that date up, but it doesn't feel, there's no pressure on that date, because it's just something I made up. But when you've got the official body of examiners, and you paid, I don't know how much it is, but they can be, I guess, a little bit expensive, some of these tests. And you have some investment in it. It's not just your little idea, because you can always say, oh, well, I said I would do this, but it doesn't really matter. There's no downside to not doing it. But if you actually signed up for it and paid for it, then, that's just hugely motivational. And I hope that people are inspired by this to perhaps do it themselves. I mean, I definitely want to do that also. Because I also think there's something about having the paperwork that describes your level. Because if you learn a lot of languages, it can be hard to kind of assess yourself. You can think that you're quite good, or you can think that you're quite bad, but it doesn't really matter what you think, because the world doesn't work out of what does Chris think about language levels. The world works through whatever countries' levels exist. So you have the CEFR or whatever in Europe, and similar things for other places. But if you have that official saying that I reached a B1 and I passed that, well, at least you're a B1. If you didn't pass the exam, your guess is as good as mine for how good my Russian is. It could be anywhere from A1 to B2. And I guess also the problem is, like you said, if you don't do the examination, you don't really work on everything at once. Like for Russian, for instance, my spoken Russian is obviously a lot better than my written Russian. But if I'd signed up for a test, I knew I had to improve my writing. So you also become a more rounded language learner. So maybe that's a little inside top tip here, sign up for language exams.
Well, maybe one thing that we should still add is, then sometimes people are saying, yeah, Michael, but you did your Russian B1 in 2008, and now it's 2017. So what the hell? Yeah. But of course, my level in Russian is different to 2008. Now, depending on how much I practiced or how much I actually applied it, it might be better or worse or whatever. But the thing is, I already know that I was able to achieve that level within so and so much effort. So first of all, a lot of it is still stored somewhere, even maybe in some more further regions of the brain. But you can definitely get much easier access to that regions much faster the next time you maybe try regaining that level or getting even higher. So if somebody says, yeah, but I forgot so much, yeah, no problems. You can remember, so it's fine.
Yeah, you'll get it back as soon as you start learning it again. Or if you go to the country, like a lot of people say that it takes about a week or so to shake off the rust. If you were previously really good in a language, then a week later you'll be pretty much back to normal. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Just a week to get back to the level. But anyway, looking forward to seeing you in Bratislava, I hope, and maybe around the world. I don't know if you're going to what is it, Iceland this year and for the conference?
Yes.
Or Montreal? You're going to Iceland? Yeah, I've never been to Iceland.
I'm definitely planning to. I haven't booked anything yet, but it's a great destination. I've been to Iceland 1.5 years ago, and it's definitely worth going there. I think they did a great job in selecting this venue this time.
Yeah, that's exciting, and they speak Danish there too, so it's useful for me. At least I've heard. I haven't been there myself, but that's what I heard. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael, and I hope to see you very soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast.